welcome to episode 2 of this Lives webinar series all about Lives expert training. Today we're going to look at why we believe at Lives that everyone should have an understanding of first aid. So we're going to look at why having a knowledge of first aid, even a basic knowledge, is really important, how it can make a big difference to not only the individual, but also the company they work for and the employees of that company as well. So we talked in the last webinar about what a huge difference bystander CPR can make and how before the ambulance arrives, if we do that CPR, a person's survival rates increase drastically. So if you did miss that, feel free to go back and check that one out because it's a really interesting subject. But also that is just one part of first aid. There's so many other vital skills that you can learn on a first aid course, and all of these are so important. So we're going to look at why that is today. But we're going to start off by looking at another reason why first aid is so important is, unfortunately, accidents at work do happen. So sometimes we're going to have to deal with those. According to the HSE, the most recent information I could find, from the years 2023 to 24, 138 workers were killed in work-related accidents. And also 87 members of the public were also killed in work-related accidents. And then there was also 604,000 people who sustained a non-fatal injury. And that's according to self-reports from the Labour Force survey. So there's probably even more than that maybe didn't get reported. So that's a lot of people that are having life-changing events happening because of work-related accidents. So not only is that going to have a huge impact on the individual, on themselves, but also on their family and others around them as well. But another thing it has a huge impact on is the company that they work for. So obviously the individual is the most important thing, but it is interesting to note that between the years of 2022 to 23, workplace injury cost companies 7.1 billion annually. And it also led to people having 4.1 million working days that were lost due to workplace injury. So that is a huge amount of time and money that end up being lost because people are having accidents at work. But what were these accidents caused by? Were they freak accidents that could never happen to me? They could never happen in my workplace. Well, it's really interesting. We've got a pie chart here that breaks down the different accidents that occurred, and actually some of them are really common accidents. So for instance, these ones here, slips, trips and falls on the same level, they're the biggest chunk of that accident pie chart. 31% of those accidents. Then there's handling, lifting or carrying at 17%. Then we have struck by a moving object at 10%. At 9%, we have acts of violence. And at 8%, we've got falls from height. And then the other 25% are all made up from injuries that are less common. If you'd like to look into more what they are, they're all on the HSE website, and it's really interesting to look at those. But just looking at the most common accidents there, I'm sure all of us can relate to at one point in our lives having one of those accidents at work. Even if we didn't get really seriously injured, we still know that they can happen. Maybe we are in a rush because we're late, or we've just got a lot to do within the day, or maybe we're really tired after a long shift and an accident just happens. We slip over, we trip over, something like that. And because of that, because accidents are bound to happen in the workplace, no matter how safety conscious we are, there is a legal requirement for companies to have first aiders. So let's have a look at what that legal requirement is. So the Health and Safety or First Aid Regulations 1981 require that employers provide adequate and appropriate equipment, facilities and personnel to ensure that employees receive immediate attention if they are injured or taken ill at work. So these regulations apply to all workplaces, including those with less than 5 employees and to self-employed people as well. So that's a bit about the regulations, but this means then because of those regulations, that training courses must be provided to the employees. So these courses should include practical first aid techniques, emergency response skills, and the use of defibrillation and things like that. So the most common version of that is first aid at work and emergency first aid at work. So first aid at work is your 3-day course, which we looked at last webinar, and emergency first aid at work is your 1-day course. They're the most common ones and ones that we teach a lot at Lives as well. Also, the HSE recommends that regular updates and training refreshers are also in place to maintain compliance and effectiveness as well. Another thing that has to be provided is first aid kits as well. And again, according to the HSE, the contents of your first aid kit is basically based on the needs of the company. But as a guide, they have sort of the basic requirements that they suggest should be in there are a leaflet with general guidance on first aid, plasters, iPads, triangular bandages, safety pins, wound dressings, and disposable gloves. So they're the sort of things that they recommend being in there and that you should find within your first aid kits where you work. So now we've got the training and we've got the equipment, but let's have a look then at how many first aiders you need within an organisation. So again, all of this is based on the HSE website. There they say that if it's a low risk workplace, the legal minimum requirement for first aiders is 1 first aider for every 50 workers within a low risk workplace. If it's a high risk workplace, then it's 1 first aider for every 25 workers. Now, each organisation will have to conduct their own first aid needs assessment, especially if maybe they've got less employees than that as well. They have to do their own first aid assessment, and that will help them to identify what is needed. And again, more information on that can be found on the HSE website. But let's just stick with that we've got that 1 first aider. 1 first aider for 50 or 1 first aider for 25, depending on the workplace. So what then if that 1 first aider decides they're going to go on holiday and there's an accident at work while they're on holiday? Or what if that first aider is ill, so they're not in the office, or they themselves are injured at work? Or what if there's more than 1 injured person? What happens then? Well, this could be really dangerous, couldn't it? It could be a really terrible thing. And also, it's quite stressful for the first aider themselves. There's quite a lot of responsibility put on their shoulders, knowing that it's just them, they're the only first aider, and they're sort of the first line of defence before the emergency services arrive. That could put a lot of pressure on someone. So that's why it's better, really, to have as many first aiders as we can. More people with a knowledge of first aid. The more people that have that knowledge, the better the outcomes are going to be. On a first aid course, one of the first things you learn within first aid, and one of the most important things, is the 3 Ps, which are on the screen here. So the first P is preserve life. The second is prevent worsening, and the third is promote recovery. This again shows what first aid is all about. It's all about keeping people safe. So it's more than just fixing issues when they arise. It's about minimizing risk, preventing injuries, and this can have a huge impact on the workplace as a whole. It also reduces the seriousness of injuries due to knowing exactly what treatment path people need. And it boosts employee confidence as well, knowing that they have the skills and the knowledge to make a difference. It means as well that if injuries do occur, they're usually a lot less severe when they're dealt with quickly and correctly, which reduces recovery time for that person. There's so many benefits to having more first aiders and first aiders that are confident in what they're doing. However, some people might still be hesitant to become a first aider or learn any sort of first aid skills. Why might that be, even with all those benefits? Well, one reason is that maybe they're scared that they're going to forget all of their training as soon as there's a first aid incident. Or maybe they're worried they're going to make a mistake. Or maybe you're a little bit squeamish and think, oh, I'm not sure how I'd deal with that in that situation. However, even if you feel like that, accidents can still happen regardless of how prepared we are. And being unprepared can lead to really serious consequences. We'll just briefly consider a case in Lincolnshire of a young lad who was working on a construction site. He unfortunately was severely injured after an accident and suffered from internal injuries. However, because there was no external injuries, no immediate action was taken to care for him. He was later then taken to a local hospital after he became visibly unwell, and then he was transferred to a specialist trauma centre, and unfortunately he did die that same day from his injuries. So obviously that's a terrible tragedy, but it does underscore the importance of first aid knowledge. Recognizing the signs of shock, such as pale skin, rapid breathing, a weak pulse, can be crucial. Obviously, as first aiders, it was an internal injury, so we wouldn't be able to fix that, but we could recognize those signs that someone was not well. And even more importantly, we would know to call the emergency services to take immediate action to make sure that this person got the help they needed. All of this can make a significant difference to the individual. Again, first aid isn't about diagnosing people. We're not doctors, and you're not expected to be as a first aider, and you're not expected to single-handedly save every single person, because unfortunately we're not always going to be able to, or stop every injury from occurring. But it's about knowing when someone needs help and then responding appropriately. It's not about being perfect, remembering absolutely everything. It's about asking yourself questions like, what signs can I see? What symptoms do they feel? Are they getting worse or are they getting better? And what emergency services do I need? And if you've had good training, it will give you the confidence to act swiftly and effectively and potentially save lives. But what's another reason maybe people might be put off becoming a first aider? Well, another reason we do sometimes hear is that people are worried they will do something wrong or that they might be sued for doing something. However, as first aiders, we really are very well protected as long as you stay within your training and you try to do what was best for the person. If there does have to be an investigation after the event, the aim of that investigation is always to establish the facts and then provide support in making adjustments to ensure it doesn't happen again in the future. The HSE are there to protect employers and to protect employees as well by providing information on how to prevent injuries and deaths and how to provide care in the workplace and improve health and safety. And that has proven effective because we are seeing less and less catastrophic accidents happening at work. So hopefully if that was a concern for you, that was something you were worried about, that has been alleviated slightly, that again, as long as you've done your best for that person, you are really well protected as a first aider. So now that we've looked at maybe the more negative side of first aid and things that people might be worried about, let's look at some really positive examples where first aid has made a huge difference in people's lives. So the first one we're going to look at is the little boy at the top there called Jack. He was 9 years old from Bishop Auckland when he learned a few first aid skills within a school assembly. And then 24 hours later, or less than 24 hours later, his father started choking at the breakfast table. Now, no one else was home, it was just him and Jack. And so Jack put his new skills into use and he was able to stop his father from choking. His father later went on to say in that article, without a doubt, the first aid assembly helped him and probably saved my life. I'm very proud. He's a little hero. That's a really lovely example, isn't it, of how first aid can be so effective. And it shows as well how it's such an important skill, not just for us as adults, but even for children too, which is why at Lives we do actually go into schools and provide age-appropriate first aid training as well, to make sure, again, that everyone has that basic understanding of it, because it can really make a difference. And then quite a famous example as well is the one at the bottom here, Fabrice Mwamba. So he in March 2012, he was 23 years old, and he was playing in a football match, and he suffered from a cardiac arrest. So his heart stopped beating effectively. But thankfully, there was medically trained staff and a St. John's ambulance unit, as well as a consultant cardiologist who just happened to be at the game because he was a fan. And all of them rushed to his aid. He was immediately given CPR, as well as oxygen, and then 15 shocks from a defibrillator. And obviously, he did survive that ordeal. And he went on to say, "Before I collapsed in 2012, I was just Fabrice. Afterwards, I was the miracle man. I was gone, but CPR brought me back." He also went on to say in a different article, "Too many people have lost loved ones because there was nobody to administer CPR or use a defibrillator when they needed it." And that's so true, isn't it? Unfortunately, we do hear of that being the case, which again is why it's so important to have that knowledge of first aid. And it's such a good thing to hear that he did end up surviving that ordeal. So there's some stories that are really nice to know, but what about in our local community? Well, we do have a local story that happened. So this is Nikki, our CEO at Lives, and her and her husband do dance sessions in their local area regularly. And one time, another member of the group collapsed in the middle of a dance. Now, because Nikki had recently done a first aid course with Lives, she was very quickly able to identify that the person was not breathing and was in cardiac arrest. She then began CPR, and she managed to achieve a ROSC, which is return of spontaneous circulation, which means that the person's heart returned to a life-sustaining rhythm, and they started to breathe again, which is amazing. So her knowledge and her quick action made a huge difference, not only to the person, but also the people around them, and to Nikki herself, because it's such an amazing feeling that you've been able to put your skills to such good use. And actually, we're going to talk more to Nikki in one of our upcoming webinar episodes. So we'll talk more about that with her. But those stories, they're so nice to hear, aren't they? It shows what a huge difference first aid training can make in people's lives. But what are some other benefits of learning first aid? We're first of all going to look at benefits for the organisation in general that you're a first aider for. Well, for the organisation, one of the main benefits is that their employees feel safe. They feel that safety is a priority in the workplace and that they're valued in the organisation. And that is so important, isn't it? Because that's how we get the best out of people. That's how people want to give more back to their company because they feel valued. Also, another really important benefit is that serious workplace accidents do reduce, and if they do occur, they're dealt with in a way that prevents further harm as well. So another huge benefit. And as well, all of this does end up saving the organisation money long term. Again, money's not the most important thing. Obviously, people's lives are the most important thing, but a company does need money to survive. And so the fact that all of this has such large benefits, but also does save them money, is again another benefit for them. So that's for the organisation. But what about your colleagues then, the people around you, if you do become a first aider? Well, one of the benefits is that, again, they feel safer. There's skilled people around them that they know will be able to help them if they ever do get into difficulty. And it's clear that their safety is valued, that it's important. Also, teamwork really improves as people do a first aid course together. I think a lot of people maybe think that first aid courses are going to be quite serious and stern, but we do try to make our first aid courses fun and interactive, obviously remembering that it is a serious subject, but it does help people to come together as a team when they do a first aid course. And it also helps colleagues to learn a bit more about each other as well. So that's really important. And then obviously, if a first aid incident does occur, they get to work together, and that again encourages teamwork, which is really important. And also, another really important thing is that everyone is more aware of risks and how to minimize them. Again, putting those 3 Ps into practice to prevent a first aid incident happening in the first place. So that's another huge benefit. And what about for you then, as the first aider? What are the benefits for you? Well, first of all, it builds your confidence, knowing that you have the skills and the knowledge to be able to help someone. Regarding your skills, it sharpens them. So the more first aid courses you do, the more your knowledge will grow and you'll become really comfortable and confident in those skills. And that really does happen. I remember the first time I did a first aid course, I was 16 and I started as an apprentice, and I thought there's no way I'd ever be able to do any of this if something happened. I was so nervous. But now, obviously, years later, I'm a responder for lives. And that's all because I had good first aid training that did build my confidence. And again, now I feel comfortable using those skills. So it really is important, and that's such a huge benefit to first aiders. Another really important benefit is that it can give you a huge sense of satisfaction when you're able to help someone on what could be their worst day. You're able to make that day a slightly bit better, or you're able to do an intervention that ends up saving their life. That's a huge sense of satisfaction and a feeling that really you can't describe. It's such a good feeling. So that's another really important benefit as well. So it's clear then that learning these basic first aid skills will make a huge difference and is really beneficial. So hopefully, if you were feeling a little bit unsure about becoming a first aider or thinking whether or not it's worth investing in first aid training, hopefully this has given you the courage and the confidence to give it a go, or maybe made you realize how important it is to have trained first aiders within your company. Remember that having skills and not needing them is always better than the alternative. It's always better that way. And at Lives, again, we do feel that if everyone had a knowledge of first aid, it could have amazing consequences if people all had a knowledge of first aid. So please do feel free to book a course now on the website or join our academy and do some online learning too, which will help sharpen your skills and help you to learn a bit more. Because it might be that you're trying to learn a little bit more, but there is a lot of information out there, isn't there? There's lots of courses or videos that you can watch to gain more knowledge. But sometimes not all of them have the most accurate information. So how do you know what's true and what's not? Well, in the next episode, next month, we're going to look at some frequently asked first aid questions, as well as some myths that you might have heard that you're not sure are true or not. So please do join us for that one, because it's going to be a really interesting one. And if you do have any questions or myths that you can think of that you would like answered, please send them into Lives and we'll answer them next month on the next episode. Thank you so much for being here, and see you on the next one.